Okay, we are recording this session, so it will be available like all of our other webinars. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions as we go along, please drop them in the chat, and we're going to save those for the end. We've built in a good amount of time for Q&A after our presentation, so we will be holding all that and then having a good conversation at the end. So if there is nothing else that I forgot, WFYI folks, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome, everybody. I'm Sarah Neal Estes. I'm the news director at WFYI.
I am Stacy Studeville. I'm the director of corporate and foundation relations.
And I am Kirsten Amon-Shine. I am the director of marketing and strategic communications.
So here's a brief overview of what we're going to talk about today. One thing to say is we are building the plane while flying it, and so we're going to talk about what that's like. I'm sure you all can relate. But it's community engagement and journalism, and is a wonderful audience opportunity for sure for products, but also a wonderful funding opportunity that we are really leading into. And we're going to talk about how we've woven the news vision with brand development and other kinds of fundraising opportunities. And of course, we will talk about the bumpy parts and different strategies that we have to address them.
First, just want to share a little bit about who we are, just to provide some context. So WFYI is a radio and a television station. We're also a community licensee. We're not attached to a university. We are located in Indianapolis, Indiana. While we have radio and television, we really think of our news distribution as digital first. This is the place where we are actually serving our community with the most local content, the most often. As with many people, our web audience exploded during pandemic. And while we've seen a little bit of a drop, it's still much higher than it was in pre-pandemic levels. Also, this is where our audience is the most diverse, which is really important. We have woven community engagement intentionally into our newsroom, as Sarah's going to talk about. And we really believe that it's contributed to our rapid news growth. We have grown our news team over the past several years from 3 reporters to a reporting team of 20.
And more than 30 with.
Oh yes, I'm sorry, thank you.
I
should, yes, but also we built a lot of collaborations that actually our news team is more than 30, and you're going to hear about that a little bit later too.
So as we've taken this journey, we've had the chance to really develop what we consider to be a strong case that we make to funders, and that's woven into the way we talk about ourselves throughout all of our marketing, especially around our news, but definitely weaves into all of our areas of content. What we're showing you in the next 2 slides is a sample from a pitch deck that we've actually shared with donors and with funders to really help them understand why community engagement fueled journalism is such a special opportunity, and also for us to kind of broaden the pool of potential funders and supporters by helping them to understand this is really an essential service, and it's something that our communities desperately need. So this is exactly what we share with them when we're presenting these things. Now, our challenge, right? The problem that we tell them about. And none of the things up on this page should be a surprise to probably anyone listening. But what we have found is when we make it clear to funders that this is really a critical problem in our society, that we're able to expand the potential funder base that's available to us. And also when we share some of these things, we strike a chord with audience members that may be experiencing this in their day-to-day life. So yes, news deserts, new players, particularly in the digital landscape, right? Unchecked misinformation, which every time we enter an election cycle, that becomes a really compelling point for a lot of funders. And then that core disconnection and distrust the media writ large is experiencing, but we can really lean on public media's halo of trust, whether or not you're looking at television or radio in terms of history, but certainly that leads over to our digital first audience today. And so then this is how we present to them, right? That public media journalism, when it is community engagement fueled especially, is a particularly compelling thing to invest in, right? Because it solves these problems, from news collaborations that help fill the gaps left by deserts or just presence, particularly in smaller communities, to the fact that we do not pop up paywalls, right? So particularly for funders that are really interested in the common good or in access to information or opportunity, that's a compelling thing. But a through line for us across the board, particularly with our local funder community, is that community engagement fuels everything we do, right? And what that has allowed us to do is to really expand beyond the small funding segment that is focused on journalism to a much broader group that maybe are focused on critical community challenges or just on the health and vibrancy of the local community.
Yeah, so how we have used this case. First, we're happy to share those slides with you and some of the other tools that we bring up along the way in this presentation. And, we're just going to talk to you a little bit today about how we've used that case specifically to raise some significant funds for our news department. Before we go into this, I have to say, we had like several conversations about we don't have this figured out. I'm not sure that we're the right people to talk about this, but you're going to hear a couple of common threads throughout, which is news vision, audience, focus on audience, how we have created and templated a case that we use with our funders. The thing that's not on here that you're going to hear often too is trust. And the way that we have figured out and built and created trust amongst our team, especially thinking through development, marketing, and our news team. So on to news vision first.
So news vision and implementation, we began our community engagement journalism vision with one beat. It was our health beat, side effects public media. And maybe a lot of you have a similar story. We noticed immediately we could register, measure more impact. And so we created a newsroom vision so that every beat, eventually we aren't there yet, but every beat will have dedicated community engagement resources to it. And so as we're doing this, we're working directly, I'm giving this vision, this is a really key thing, was that I was able to give, and it was very well received. They were like, yes, please give me the vision, to my colleagues, and they helped me work on it. They gave me a lot of help. There have been lots of long conversations, lots of, talking it through. But what we do is it's now part of every single ask. If it's a reporter, it may not even be an explicit community engagement ask. We are telling the story of our community engagement newsroom. And we are taking all of the impacts that we are collecting and we are giving that to development so that even when I'm not there and even when it's not a grant ask, all of them can talk about what we're doing and find new opportunities for us, for us, because we all share the vision. And, because we've been doing this since 2019, as a team, we've been able to raise more than $6 million, which is the reason we could grow from it was 6 at that point to 20, but also our collaborations, that's why I was 20 or 30. Our collaborations have this same vision and they are just as successful. Oh yes, and I do want to say that one of the things that we do that some people have raised their eyebrows at, that I just want to say, because it's really, really helped in building trust and understanding, is that when we're writing the grants, and I do lead the process and the one sheets that describe the beats and all that stuff, but development works with us and gives us feedback about what's clear, what doesn't make sense, what's what about this? And some people think that makes oh my God, the firewall. But for us, it's not like that, because they know our vision and we all have the same vision and that's where we're going. And it's just impact, what makes sense to them, helps us make it stronger. I don't know if that makes sense.
That's good. Yeah. So, we really have used, we have taken Sarah's news vision with community engagement at the center of it. And, because the vision is clear and because we continuously capture kind of proof of concept and impact, we have been able to use this case over and over again to raise funding support for our news initiatives. And I have to say, even if it's not people, it is, we have raised grants that just provide support for the non-staff work that we do. So we have a grant for training for our news and engagement teams and marketing dollars and equipment and community engagement efforts. And it's all because we have the overall vision, right? When we are telling the story to funders and we're having conversations about what they're interested in supporting, the thing that we always see pop that raises our eyebrows or has them like sit up and take notice is when we talk about community engagement. We talk about the way that we've centered it in our newsroom and that we, genuinely are focusing on it as part of our news process. I will say something that we have found to be incredibly important as we have applied for many grants is that we write marketing and administrative costs into the grant budget. So when we present a budget to a funder, we try for 15% of the overall ask is marketing and 10% is administrative. And we do that because we are in an environment where we cannot continue to rely on accidental discovery. We can't put great work on our website and think somebody will find it because it's so good. We have to spend money to bring in audiences. And we have found that being intentional about that, it only makes the grant stronger. You have more impact. And then our marketing team has actual budget to help tell those story of what we're doing. The administrative costs, we put that, it really just kind of covers those general operating costs of if you hire new people, you have HR costs, you have, equipment, things like that. The other thing that I want to say, I want to share two more things. One is something that our News Vision has prevented for us that has been important is mission creep. I think sometimes we might see a grant. We've all done it. We're not, we probably did this at least once last year, but we're getting so much better. Where, we're not creating ideas to fit into grants. I have to tell you, there have been many times when we have said no to a grant opportunity, and that feels as good as going all in on an ask because it's like, no, we don't want to do that because that's not our focus. This is. And so, that's been really great, but I'm in development, so I like to talk about opportunities more than the times we say no. And so I want to talk about how we have taken this grant funding case and we really have gone beyond grant funders and we are starting to step into the space where we're making corporate philanthropic asks. I'm going to give you an example. There is a national organization, Report for America, right? And they provide grant funding to put journalists into different newsrooms. They cover half of the reporter's costs. You have to find funding for the other half. And so we have had, I was having a lot of conversations with Cummins, which is an international company. They are a huge supporter of WFYI. They think we're wonderful, but they do not need us for corporate underwriting. They do not need to tell our market their branding message because we're not exactly their target audience when it comes to marketing dollars. But in multiple conversations about how we can get support from them and what we could possibly do, when we told them about this position and our vision of hiring a community justice reporter, really focused on community justice and equity, they immediately were like, we will fund the second half of that reporter's salary for 2 years. So not only did we leverage a Report for America grant, we got $100,000 from this funder to cover the salary and benefits for the reporter for 2 years. So now we have to figure out how to keep her for a third, but that is a problem for another day. But that's just a really solid example of how we've been able to take that corporate philanthropic approach. We have another grant with another corporate business kind of entity that is providing support for an economic equity reporter. And we found great success with
So
that.
not the reporter, but support for.
Support for, and I think that's something to be really clear about though, is when we're talking to these corporate philanthropic people, because I understand the vision, I understand the firewall. This I think can be scary sometimes, right? Is I'm not trying to ask for money for an economic reporter to report on all of the amazing things that businesses are doing in the community, right? No, we go in and we say, this is the need that we see, this is how we're solving the need, and you don't get to have a say. You know, but you're doing a great thing in our community. You don't get to have a say on reporting, I should make that clear. But you're doing a great, you're providing our community with a great service. And we've had good success telling that story.
So just as it's been really helpful for us to make sure that funders understand that community engagement fueled journalism is distinct and special and a unique opportunity that, you know, being associated with WFYI gives them, something that's so important to me from a marketing perspective is that we help our local audiences understand what is special and unique about the kinds of news that we provide locally, right? We are in a very competitive market, obviously, around news, particularly with new actors stepping in or with large corporate entities who have, you know, the money to promote, even if I think that our content is always, you know, special, high context, valuable, beautifully presented with an equity lens. But what we know is that it's really important for us to differentiate and market. And so we've really focused in on developing a clear identity around our journalism lens around the whole brand, right? So we have what we call a vertical, which is our WFYI News brand. And we've been able to develop templates around that to promote it, to pull people in. So when we're using the funding that we're able to get around marketing, what we want to do is use that not just to drive eyeballs to our top stories. Obviously that matters, but we want people to really begin to understand what is distinctive and special about having a public media journalism entity in their community that is operating with a community engagement lens. We listen, we are connected, we ask them questions, right? And not just like in the, this is fun and it'll drive engagement on our Instagram post way, but in a way that is authentic and meaningful. And don't get me wrong, we will sometimes drive engagement on an Instagram post, but around our journalism, we bring a level of gravitas and seriousness so that we're never sort of stepping on that brand identity, because you have to know, as a joint licensee, I'm promoting Sanditon alongside, you know, hard-hitting news about education policy. And so us being able to sort of make it clear to our audience what we're doing when, but also to make sure they understand what is special and distinctive about our news has been really helpful for us. There's the flip side of that though, right? Let's really look at how marketing is serving our news story or attracting eyeballs to consume that content. The other piece of this is that we have marketing lessons, particularly around audience, you know, not just sort of audience trends or what we see people reacting to, but what we see them asking questions around, what we see them sharing the most with friends or colleagues. And so what we've been able to do is to establish in a way that preserves the firewall, but that really leverages the insights we see from the way the audiences are interacting with our content, right? So we give them templates that we know will position content effectively, but we also say to them, ooh, we're seeing that Reels are blowing up on Instagram. How can we leverage that to share important information in ways that are right-sized for that environment? And we partner around that. So that's been a huge value to us. And one other thing is, as a joint licensee, we have some spaces that are co-managed that inside a radio license may not be co-managed. So our social media spaces, our websites, a lot of digital environments are co-owned, co-managed, co-populated, and that varies a little bit depending on the space between both teams. And so we've really had to build a lot of clarity around who's doing what when, but also making sure that we're consistently executing on distributing content, but then also making sure that we're providing that two-way conversation between our teams internally.
And so as we've gone through all of this, we've had bumpy parts. And so we wanted to acknowledge that. It's been very inauthentic to tell this story without acknowledging that. But I have to say, like, before I say them, what got us through them was like the shared vision. Like, that's a really important takeaway, is that everyone knows what that is. Because then when you hit these culture eats strategy for breakfast moments where people are scared of change, or there's internal silos that used to be mine, all of those kinds of things, you go, but we're going here. I know we all feel like we don't have enough time. It's so hard to have enough time. But really you have to carve out time to design strategy with each other and address problems and keep everyone informed is also a challenge. But you just kind of keep those goals in mind. Everyone shares those goals. There are still opportunities that we have on the table still, and we've had a lot of success with grants. Stacey's talked about this a bit, is like finding other ways to build revenue, building people into operating, getting off of those grant cliffs. We're having progress and actively developing those things, but they are challenges. It's not magic.
Yeah, I'll just kind of echo that or add to that. A challenge that we've really had is we've been able to secure grant funding and some philanthropic support, but we have not had success in figuring out how to create sponsorship opportunities around some of our community engagement work. And I'm really, what I mean by that mostly is like a series of town halls. We might do a series of town halls about, XYZ thing. I might not find out about it in enough time. Again, going back to communication, where we, I think, still struggle is if I don't know about it 2 months in advance, I really cannot turn anything around. So it's just, still trying to figure out some of those things.
And so we're both like, so what we thought is if we could just take this moment to populate the chat with some thoughts as we're on challenges so that we can preserve them for us as we really want to talk about the challenges in the discussion.
Yeah, and I also see there are a couple of chat posts. Chelsea, I don't know if you want to raise any of those up for us or if there's anything that's popped up along the way.
So far, the chat is just me letting people know who you are from left to right. So please put your thoughts in the chat, especially related to this question. We'll have a discussion after. Thanks.
Silos are a problem.
Mm-hmm.
If anybody has that problem.
Yeah. I think something that I've been reflecting on as we built out this presentation too is in terms of communication, I think that we've really done a great job of communicating the vision amongst our teams and maybe at our director level, where I think that we still probably can do more work is communicating it with the entire station. And then I think so much about how are we also communicating it to our board, our major donors, our volunteers. I don't think we've woven it completely into our station's narrative that one of my account executives could succinctly tell the story and get it correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
A couple things to share from the chat, from the perspective of a news director, knowing what information to pass on to development. Next challenge is resources, biggest one being time, which you can't create more of. And who manages or owns marketing? It's a shared role between teams.
Yeah, I mean, those are always challenges. I think we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we think culturally have made this possible and some of the processes that we've built out. But the thing that I've only been at the station for 2 years and 7 days. So I joined the team during the pandemic, which means that I joined the team during massive audience shifts. Mm-hmm. And when the organization was figuring out how to work remotely and a lot of other things. And so I think probably for the last 18 months, a lot of my gig has been about building role clarity and understanding of who does which pieces. And sometimes that's me turning it out and saying, does this seem right to you? And sometimes it's meeting together. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, but we've really worked hard to establish role clarity. So even if marketing is a shared function, right? I think sometimes knowing who does what even within that space is so important, and understanding what resources we have. I think exactly that second point, right?
Mm-hmm. And because that we are short on resources too, everyone, sometimes that looks like you get to this, okay, well, who owns what now?
Yeah. And then what's the future vision?
Yeah. What's the future vision? Is this a one-time thing or is this
so yeah, we're going to talk about some of those pieces.
Thanks for putting that in there. If you think of anything else, please put it in there.
Yeah, and we'll have time for questions, and we'll also have some times for imagining and dreaming together a little bit later on too.
Yeah, so as we think about some of those challenges we had, one of the things that we are going to share with you, we're going to share with you kind of some environmental factors at play that are not wholly in our control. And then Kirsten's going to talk about some some processes and some tools that you can implement. Like, so even if you don't have some of these environmental factors at play, you can create, you can still create some process. So first, a couple of internal factors at WFYI. We have really supportive leadership at the executive and direct, like at the executive level. There is a sense of comfort with change that we are experiencing at our station. We have made great strides in role clarity, as Kirsten mentioned, still a work in progress. But the most important thing I think internally is that we have really been able to build trust between development, marketing, and news. And I know that that is not necessarily something that happens all of the time at other stations, based on lots of conversations that I've had with colleagues around the country. You know,
Well, and I think based on some previous experience
Here.
within the station, historically as well.
Yeah, that's true. So we have worked together to build this vision, as Sarah mentioned, that it's the station's vision for news. We evolve it. We face challenges together as a team. I think that we are able to have direct conversations with each other. That's, you know, for us, we all manage teams. So it's like, oh, this person, like I'm sensing some friction. You know, what can we do to fix it? But we address those problems together. We also are we're in a space right now where our leadership has a very entrepreneurial spirit. Our CEO really, like, I think if he looks on the horizon and he sees an opportunity, he will seize it. And so I think we're really benefiting from that in terms of how quickly we move and how we have capitalized on several opportunities. I also just do want to say we are in the Indianapolis market, which does have a lot of really strong funders. You know, Eli Lilly is here, and some other corporations that we've been able to tap into.
So those are the things that were beyond our control, right? That we want to acknowledge, in many ways set us up to be able to develop the tools and processes that we have. But we think these are the things that are replicable, that are shareable, right? And as we've mentioned before, we're happy to share these, right? All boats rise. That's the beauty of public media. I have worked in spaces before where I didn't have a direct kind of analog organization in other spaces. So we definitely are happy to talk about how we've been able to evolve all of this and to share examples of it. So one thing that we've really developed, and that Stacey has mentioned already a little bit, are those funding templates, right? Things that we're directly giving to folks whose business is to give money to meaningful community change projects, right? So program overviews and budgets. Things where we know we're presenting a vision that may not be as complex as the one inside Sarah's head, but that never steps far afield from that vision, right? We have news desk one sheets that Sarah has provided to really make sure that we have clearly articulated ideas about that we can share with others about what it is that those beats do, that the news desk does, so we can be very clear. That growth area, as Stacey mentioned before, is the idea of building kind of more templated sponsor opportunities. Things like, oh, we know we'll be doing 6 town halls in the next year, you know, things where we know that there's a little bit of flexibility and they can still be responsive to the news cycle, but where we could be providing some additional support behind that, right? We also have a very rich world of audience-facing templates. We have utilized Canva. I know that Chelsea and Elisa have talked about Canva in other spaces. We find it incredibly helpful to have this web-based design tool, because what it does is it allows us to minimize the amount of barrier before people can step into and utilize templates that are created by marketing, right? So we have visual templates that we typically partner on the creation of. So news might say, oh, we need something to feature a stats graph, or we need something that still connotes a level of gravitas and seriousness around news, but where we could, you know, look at what some other news places are doing and make sure that we're presenting information in a way that's appropriate for that space. And we might have, from a marketing perspective, you know, thoughts on, well, how do we make sure that we're, you know, situating this in a way that will perform well, or are we avoiding the spaces you're supposed to avoid on a reel? Alongside that, we have foundational brand guides, and one of those includes our WFYI news brand. Sarah, the editorial team, and my marketing team all partnered on the language around that. And then every single promotional thing that we create is based in that brand guide. So our news team is never going to see something in market that isn't going to feel right to them about the news brand, right? And it is that level of clarity and of structure that ensures that we also don't have to ask them every time we create a new visual, right? Because they got to be writing, right? And we've got to be promoting. And so that allows us to really have clarity around that. We also have impact updates. We're so excited to hear about the impact tracker because it'll make that a little bit easier, but we've been sharing internally, the editors in particular share updates with us that we can then utilize to update funders, to update donors, to update our audience on important ways that our reporting is influencing public conversations or even sometimes policy. And then our growth is to utilize that impact tracker more consistently so that we don't have to kind of be doubling down on reporting that work, and also make sure that when we're seeing things, we can share them.
Just on that impact tracker. One of the things from the news director who wrote, like, what should I tell marketing and development more than you are telling marketing and development? I mean, that's always, I try to tell, you know, it's like we are building the plane while flying it. I have a new impact tracker and I didn't tell them, and they found out when we were making this presentation. There's always stuff like that, but see, they're laughing with me. They're mad.
Nobody's mad. Well, part of that too is our trust is based in the fact that we always are assuming positive intent of one another. So the fact, I know that Sarah is busy. I don't think she like had this impact tracker over to the side and was like, ooh, I can't share it, or I don't trust them. It is, you know, it's just because we're all moving so fast and we're all doing important pieces of the puzzle. And knowing that, you know, my IMAC thought, because I'm Midwestern, is, oh, she's a silly goose, not, why wouldn't she have shared that with me, right? And so I think that is such an important piece for us.
My favorite moment that happened when we discovered that is immediately Kirsten and Sarah started having a conversation about the right, like the feedback that we get on social media, or the feedback that we'll get from members, and how do we track that, and what does that look like? Because that you know, I think that is as valuable. You know, it's another valuable audience tool or tracker metric that we should really be paying attention to.
Yeah, and another key thing for us that, you know, overlaps to some of these pieces is that we have established internal workflows and processes that bring us to the places where we can develop that kind of trust, right? So we have collaboration is baked into our approaches. Before a grant is written, we have a grant stakeholder meeting. Stacy has a team member who helps everyone navigate through that process, and also is the person who will track, you know, where we are in an an application process or a reward process or all of those kinds of things. You know, he's also though not writing the grants to design the practice, right? That ensures that we're all in that space, and the person that really owns the content decisions can own them. The person that can inform, you know, the marketing can be in there. We also, and this is part of my, I love role clarity, have been utilizing RACI charts in an ongoing way. If you've never utilized this before, they share who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, and who's informed in any project. And particularly in co-owned spaces like social media, like our email newsletters, like things like that. It's really valuable for us to have really clear understanding of who ultimately does the thing, who says that is correct, who has to have their input included, and then, you know, who is just told that it's happening. You know, again, public media, can-do spirit. Sometimes people would just hop in and say, it's my gig. But sometimes it doesn't make sense anymore once you build up the team a little bit more. So that really helps to, you know, support us. But then we also, just like we use Canva to ensure smart workflows and brand consistency, we also use Sprout. There are many other social media scheduling spaces, but we have clearly identified times. We have different roles. You know, we have a manager on duty that responds to concerns or questions versus people that are just kind of scheduling things. So we really have tried to develop processes that work towards our common goals, and where we don't have clarity around what the common goal or answer should be, we really work to tease that out.
So we would love to hear, there's our overview of our plane that we're building while flying. And so we're really interested also, you know, to hear if you had similar success, or do you see similar opportunities at your stations? If you could like get some of those ideas in the chat. And we'd love to learn from you too. Like, what problems have you solved and how? It's
And
exciting
if you
to
have any questions about, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry. We didn't-
Thank you guys so much for that. Yeah, everybody, please feel free to drop in the chat any questions that you have from the whole conversation about this question specifically. I just wanted to raise that first question about what information to pass on. Is there anything specifically that you guys like? I know you have those
Impact.
templates, and that would be wonderful.
Impact and get an impact tracker, like they've been presented. We have one from another American Amplified presentation in Harkin. And do it that way, because I've been doing it in this really, really messy way. And this is just so much easier. And now I actually have my journalists putting and communication specialists putting the impact in themselves. And we're almost there with that.
And just to add on to that, so what I'm trying to do is to have kind of the areas of news that we focus on. I'm trying to have like a couple of substantial, like concise impact stories that in a Word document, essentially. So, you know, if someone on my team is talking to a sponsor who is really into that education work that we're doing, we can grab those impact stories. So even if I'm not there yet, but where I want to get to with the sales team is like, even if you're just talking about, not just, because it's very important too, even if you're talking about corporate underwriting, you're talking with a marketing person to talk about how we can solve some of their marketing issues, we're still reinforcing, and also here is what you're supporting. And so I'm using those impact stories from news to reinforce the impact.
Well, and all of those stories are things that then can be dialed up into your CPB annual impact report.
Yeah.
They're things that can be put into, you know, donor acquisition emails, especially major donor communications. All of those things are truly, anyone that's going to have that philanthropic draw, or that's maybe currently transactional and you're trying to grow into more of a philanthropic relationship, those are all the kinds of things that we should work on once really well and then distribute 50 times,
Yeah.
right? And that's a lot of, I think that sometimes we all worry about bombarding one another with too much information or sharing things too soon before they're actionable. But what we have found universally is that the sooner something is flagged for us, or the more transparent the sharing is. So go ahead and share with the whole team, right? Go ahead and put there, because what it does is it minimizes the chances that a golden nugget gets lost in the mix of everything. And you know, when Sarah has an idea, we'll oftentimes workshop it together, even thinking strategically, oh, well, what would staffing look like on that? Or, ooh, what would be the market acquisition? It's just a normal part of us being leaders within the organization together. I see that Jennifer has her hand raised.
Yeah, I just want to, that was my initial question. And I think this is, everything's been sort of very cool and very mind blowing. I think, you know, we have a smaller staff, and we're just not sort of interdepartmentally quite as collaborative, not for any lack of like not liking each other or not trusting each other, but we just don't have those systems in place. So thinking about sort of getting that started, I'm interested in the sort of push versus pull. Like I have a lot of data in the newsroom that I'm keeping track of. I have an impact tracker. I have web stats. I have diversity, you know, source diversity stuff. And I can just copy my marketing people in on all of those reports. They're kind of internal, you know, but also like I've never been asked by anybody in marketing for like any of this information. So like, you know, how do we train each other to sort of know what we're looking for? Because now I'm like, it's kind of disturbing that like, why aren't the marketing people asking me what I'm doing? Shouldn't they need to know that so that they can help?
Yeah.
So I want to give Stacy credit here, because I was like your marketing department. I didn't think anybody wanted anything. Like I'm just like over here, you know. And Stacy's like, I need to sell. I have these opportunities. We can do this, you know. And so we've been learning that way. So maybe just reach out. Like I was like, oh, you care? oh, like, okay, so maybe just reach out and say, like, I saw that,
Well, I also think some of those things you're talking about are about poor organizational health, right? There are things that, depending on what performance metrics you've identified for your team, are those things that it makes sense to just elevate internally to be like, hey, y'all, we killed it on this, or like, this is a place where we thought we'd do better. Does anyone have ideas? Or, this is this new tool we've developed. I'm not sure if everyone has thoughts on how to use it. Those are, I love it when someone just gives me a little bit of a window into their world, right? Because it helps me better understand, what they're working on all the time. But it typically leaves me better informed about like the business I'm in, right? I mean, for lack of a better term, I've spent my whole career in nonprofits. It's like the only thing I know is like trying to raise money based on impact, right? And that is all exactly that. And so, yeah, I wonder if sometimes we forget that people want to cheer us on too, and that just saying, and it is also probably, I was an extrinsic motivation junkie as a kid. Like I was like, give me an A, tell me I'm special, right? And so I'm always like, look at me, I'm special, friend. And I think like Sarah's much more humble about it too, right? So she's like, I'm just doing this thing over here. But I think when we do share with one another our successes and our challenges, it just automatically opens doors to further collaboration. I do have to say though, I think a lot of the places where we've had the chance to develop our collaboration is through problems. Like when we have seen funding problems, staffing problems, dreams of doing something bigger, but not being staffed well enough to do it, me not understanding why things flowed the way they did when I first started, all of those things, it's been a chance for us to listen and share, and through that stuff bubbles up organically too.
Did that help? I don't know.
Yeah, no, it totally does. I mean, I think part of it, I think the answer is kind of like, just start doing it and then you'll figure it out.
Well, yeah, I when I like reflect, I think like, when did this kind of start? And I think about I'm a talker. I like to talk. I like to listen as much as I like to talk. And so what I have found in building my collaborative relationship with Sarah is over many conversations. I mean, really, it's just, tell me what you're working on. Tell me about this. How are you solving this problem? And just because I'm a fan, I'm like, have you heard about this news story? How are we covering it? Yeah, I'm just like an insatiably curious person too, right? And so I think is how we started. Is like baseline that we just started talking to each other.
Oh, also the vision, like community engagement journalism is real. It does check those boxes. You can show it, people can see it. That having that vision and sharing it. So share that vision. Does your marketing person, do they have that? Do they know like your vision?
Sort of. A little bit, not super explicit. Yeah, and I think that's what I love about community engagement journalism too, because I feel like in our older model, that idea of like someone from development coming to me with a story idea and asking me like, how are we covering this? I would just be like, get out of my space. Like, don't tell me what to do. And now when you're thinking very holistically about us all being part of the same community, and, like a marketing person and a development person, they live here too. And also like they have different communities and different insights into the community. And if we're really truly like meeting our community's needs, informational and other, with everything that we're doing at the station, like the story ideas should be bubbling up from all over the organization, because we're all sort of the eyes on our community, eyes and ears in our community.
I love so much the way you said that.
I
love that.
And we're game for follow-up conversations too. So if your folks couldn't join us on this call, just let us know. We're happy to chat more.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, this is our home team at America Amplified. So we're hosted by WFYI, and we're really lucky to have these really experienced folks as a resource and sort of always at our fingertips. So if anybody on this call wants more questions answered by them, we have really direct access.
Well, and Chelsea, rubber and glue, because it, you know, what you say to me bounces off and sticks to you. Because truly, having America Amplified here too, I think demonstrates for our whole team how this is just an essential part of how we can move forward and what the value is for this approach. And so it's hugely beneficial for us just to have these conversations with one another too, with other stations.
We do still have some time. Does anyone else have any questions or comments that they wanted to raise? If you don't feel like speaking up, I'm happy to put them or read them for you from the chat. So.
But I'd also say, I mean, from what you guys have heard from the processes that WFYI are experimenting with, I mean, do you feel like you could put them in place in your newsrooms, in your station, I should say, as a whole? Or do you see, are there some challenges to that? And what are the challenges? Jennifer raised some, obviously, but are there others?
I'm sort of curious too, like along those lines, you know, if some of the marketing and development folks who are on this call, like I found the America Amplified project like a really hard one to define for a lot of people in the organization. You know, I've just been like, that America Amplified project we're working on, like it's been a little nebulous and I think hard to explain. And I'm just wondering if other stations have sort of like, you know, figured out, or if people on the sort of non-content side like fully understand what's happening with this project, because I think it's a good example of like one that's like has a lot of touch points, but it, you know, there's a lot of new stuff here that I think for all parts of organizations is new and different and maybe a little intimidating or confusing right now.
In the chat, we have a comment. I do think the biggest issue is going to be finding a way to incorporate quote unquote new culture ideas into the packed schedule. Highlighting the importance of doing that is going to be the priority.
Please start with vision. Because, you know, when we weren't working like this, like when I started here at our station, and I had opportunities through like participating in things like America Amplified to train myself and develop a vision, and I had support there first, like Ely, you know, like and so like sometimes to seek those opportunities, and then you have other kinds of support and know you're not crazy and this is possible, and you know, your station probably wants to click all the same boxes, right, that you do. They want to fill new deserts and save the world and strengthen democracy and, you know, all of that, you know, so that here are real ways we can do it, and you go there.
You know, it was not easy to the point of like people being super busy. How do you get people to pay attention? How do you explain what this is? I mean, I remember having many conversations with you, Sarah, where we talk about like, how do we make sure that ELT, our executive leadership team,
right,
how do they hear it? Do they get it? Do they believe it? Like, this is what we think. Does everyone buy into this? And I think that we clarified it every time we applied for a grant, applied for funding.
That's true.
We like that helped
For
refine.
sure.
You know, I don't think that Sarah's vision is radically different from what she, you know, what day one, or, you know,
But nobody had
now.
said, we
Yeah.
couldn't name it.
Yeah, we could, yeah. And then the other thing that I do all the time, this is like, it's probably too basic, but people are so busy and they forget all the time and they can't keep up, and like Zoom fatigue and all the things. I was like, what are the three what are the three talking points? Boom, boom, boom. And you say them all the time. Like in COVID, I said the same 3 things about corporate underwriting every single time we had a staff meeting, every single time.
They're a lot better at that than I
Well, and, I will say that's why having the brand document is so
Yeah.
important. My team is dealing with marketing materials about the next Ken Burns, biodoc and finding your roots and Alma's way and and then never mind all of the radio, like NPR shows. And then what are we doing with our own things?
Yeah.
Having something where they're like, no, what do I say about that? Here it is.
Yeah.
Here's your doc. Here's exactly what you need to say. Here's the blurb. Here are the 3, our competitive analysis on our news brand. Here's what we offer to people distinctly. Here's 5 ways I've distributed, I've created some templates for you. Our designer designed them. Let's just move on and do it. And part of that also is like, audiences don't want novelty. Funders don't want novelty. What they want are things that they can trust.
Yeah.
Right. That's how we're the answer. And so
I just wanted to, if I could, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I
No,
wanted
no.
to call out Elizabeth Arias, who's on the call. And she works in development at WITF, which is another station that is doing quite a bit with engagement. And Elizabeth, I just was wondering what your thoughts were on this presentation and if you had some other procedures and processes that work at WITF.
Yeah, I think so far everything that has been said has been very helpful and very true to what we have done so far. Over the past 3 years, I would say, probably before that, but that's when I started and I could see the wheels turning. Our content team and our development team have been really intentional about trying to remove barriers in communication, because I am sure that other people have faced this where, like you guys were talking about before, where there's that firewall, right? And even with our education folks, holding on to what's yours and not necessarily collaborating. So what we do, we have been really working hard to stay in that communication and focusing on that big picture. Again, like all the things you guys have been talking about before. We meet monthly to talk about opportunities and current grants and what might be on the horizon. But for example, with our America Amplified grant that we received this past year, what we are doing is news and brews events where our journalists will have, full right to make that what they need to make that. We're going to be engaging our community with our reporters, and they're going to be reporting off of those kinds of things. However, we need that communication with our development team so that we can write the best narrative alongside of them. Every grant that I work on, since I work primarily on our journalism grants, we have someone else that does education. I have to work very closely with our director of journalism because I don't know the programs as well as they do. And if we're not working collaboratively, that's not the best way to get a good narrative. So it really is all about that communication and staying organized. And I've really appreciated what you've said so far, but there is the opportunity to get past the barriers that we put between ourselves. And I think it is just a cultural change that we have to continuously push for, because I think it is in all of our natures to be like, well, I was working on this thing and I had this thought and I was hoping to do this, but where are we going as an organization, as public media, and what is our main objectives and how do we align ourselves to do that? But yeah, I think so far this has been really helpful for me to just listen into and get your insights and see that we are, so far it seems like we're in a good place. So thank you guys for this.
No, thank you. It's interesting to hear, that someone else is having the same journey.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
Yeah. It's not been a smooth one all the time. It's taken, I think a lot of work to make ourselves trust each other.
But it's like in the trenches together work, right? There is this wonderful spirit that develops out of that I think also, like when I think about it from I manage other people perspective, seeing us all do that, I think helps them really grow their own ability to collaborate internally too. So it's kind of like we should all be the change we wish to see in the world, right? And so truly modeling that for our team also gives them that chance to live into that space in a way that feels a little bit more just, yeah, this is what we do. This is what we do inside the space.
Right, right. I think something else that has helped us, I think, is having people in place to communicate with the departments in particular. So my role is to write grants for our content, so journalism and multimedia grants. And then we have someone who does education. So I stay in tune with what's going on in our content land and then can bring that back to our department. And obviously, again, there are things I still don't know because we do have that firewall like the rest of you, but it keeps someone in that constant communication. They know who to go to when they have a new project idea. They know where to get their support, and I know too who to talk to.
That reminds me, I meant to say earlier that another thing that we're still learning to communicate is like, what are we working on? Right?
Mhm.
Like development and marketing always need to know what you're working on. And sometimes you're like, well, I mean, that could change. Like, you know,
We're like,
I don't know what happens. They're like, but like just big themes, like, you know, the big threads you're pulling to remember to tell somebody, you know, we're doing a deep dive on special education licenses. You can say that much.
yeah.
I mean, I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know when the story is going to be done, but like,
Yeah.
but I can tell them what they're looking at. If it's an investigation that is super sensitive, then maybe not. But like, you know, most things aren't that sensitive, at least not in ours. We do investigations, but a lot of it's enterprise, and you can totally tell somebody what your theme is.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much.
Like, go ahead.
Oh, sorry to cut you off. We're at our time, and I don't want to hold anybody longer than we promised. But as I said before, we have contact for all of these folks, and we also will be sharing, or will you still be sharing the templates and those one-sheeters
Yes.
for folks?
Y'all, it's real over here. I have to leave to pledge drive. And so we may have a slight delay between when we package all that up and we get it to Chelsea and Elisa, but I gotta go get some money for the station in another room. So
double thank you for hosting this in the middle of Fund Drive. We will share the recording and all of those assets when they're ready. But everybody, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank